Chapter 5. There were 6 large grey tents, and each one had a black letter on it, A, B, C, D, E or F. The first 5 tents were for the campers. The councillors slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Bodansky was his councillor. "My name is easy to remember," said Mr. Bodansky as he shook hands with Stanley just outside the tent. 3 easy words: pen, dance, key. Mr. Sir returned to the office. Mr. Bodansky was younger than Mr. Sir, and not nearly as scary looking. The top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered in a thick, curly black beard. His nose was really badly sunburned. "Mr. Sir isn't really so bad," said Mr. Bodansky. "He's just been in a bad mood ever since he's quit smoking. The person you've got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at Camp Green Lake: don't upset the warden." Stanley nodded as if he understood. "I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you," Mr. Bodansky said. "I understand you've made some bad mistakes in your life, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid." Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try and tell his councillor that he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably said that. He didn't want Mr. Bodansky to think he had a bad attitude. "I'm going to help you turn your life around," said his councillor, "but you're going to have to help too. Can I count on your help?" "Yes, sir," Stanley said. Mr. Bodansky said good, and patted Stanley on the back. 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound. Mr. Bodansky called to them, "Rex, Alan, I want you to come and say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team." The boys glanced wearily at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and one kid was black. "What happened to Bath Bag?" asked the black kid. "Lewis is still in the hospital," said Mr. Bodansky. "He won't be returning." He told the boys to come shake Stanley's hand and introduce themselves, like gentlemen. "Hi," the white kid grunted. "That's Alan," said Mr. Bodansky. "My name's not Alan," the boy said. "It's Squid, and that's X-Ray." "Hey," said X-Ray. He smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. Mr. Bodansky told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led him inside the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet from the one next to it. "Which was Lewis's cot?" Mr. Bodansky asked. "Bath Bag slept here," said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. "All right, Stanley, that'll be yours," said Mr. Bodansky. Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had once been used by somebody named Bath Bag. 7 crates were stacked in 2 piles at one side of the tent. The open end of the crates faced outwards. Stanley put his backpack, change of clothes, and towel in what used to be Bath Bag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that had 3 in it. Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first 3 were introduced by Mr. Bodansky as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They called themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. "They all have nicknames," explained Mr. Bodansky. "However, I prefer to use the names that their parents gave them, the names that society will recognise them by when they return to become useful and hard-working members of society." "It ain't just a nickname," X-Ray told Mr. Bodansky. He tapped the rim of his glasses. "I can see inside you, Mum. You've got a big fat heart." The last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Bodansky and X-Ray called him Zero. "You know why his name's Zero?" asked Mr. Bodansky. "Because there's nothing inside his head." He smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. Zero said nothing. "And that's Mom," a boy said. Mr. Bodansky smiled at him. "If it makes you feel better to call me Mum, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mum." He turned to Stanley. "If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you." Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their home sanitary, which means they want to keep it clean. You were all new here once, said Mr. Bodansky, and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley. Stanley looked at the ground. Mr. Bodansky left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty he felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. Hey, Theodore, he said, going after him, do you know where I can fill my canteen? Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. My name's not Theodore, he said. It's Armpit. He threw Stanley to the ground. Stanley stared at him, terrified. There's a water speaker on the wall of the shower stall. Thanks, Armpit, said Stanley. As he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep on a cot that had been used by somebody named Bathbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. Stanley took a shower, if you could call it that, ate dinner, if you could call it that, and went to bed, if you could call it smelly and scratchy a bed. Because of the scarcity of water, each camper was only allowed a 4-minute shower. It took Stanley nearly that long to get used to the cold water. There was no knob for hot water. He kept stepping into, then jumping back from the spray, until the water shut off automatically. He never managed to use his bar of soap, which was just as well, because he wouldn't have had time to rinse off the suds. Dinner was some kind of stewed meat and vegetables. The meat was brown, and the vegetables had once been green. Everything tasted pretty much the same. He ate it all, and used his slice of white bread to mop up the juice. Stanley had never been one to leave food on his plate, no matter how it tasted. "What'd you do?" one of the campers asked him. At first, Stanley didn't know what he meant. "They sent you here for a reason." "Oh," he realised, "I stole a pair of sneakers." The other boys thought that was funny. Stanley wasn't sure why. Maybe because their crimes were a lot worse than stealing shoes. "From a store, or were they on someone's feet?" asked Squid. Neither," Stanley answered. "They belonged to Clyde Livingston." Nobody believed him. "Sweet feet," said X-Ray. "Yeah, right." "No way," said Squid. Now, as Stanley lay on his cot, he thought it was kind of funny in a way. Nobody had believed him when he said he was innocent. Now, when he said he'd stole them, nobody believed him either. Clyde Sweetfeet Livingston was a famous baseball player. He'd led the American League in stolen bases over the last 3 years. He was also the only player in history to ever hit 4 triples in one game. Stanley had a poster of him hanging on the wall of his bedroom. He used to have the poster anyway. He didn't know where it was now. It had been taken by the police and was used as evidence of his guilt in the courtroom. Clyde Livingston also came to court. In spite of everything, when Stanley found out that Sweetfeet was going to be there, he was actually excited about the prospect of meeting his hero. Clyde Livingston testified that they were his sneakers and that he had donated them to raise money for the homeless shelter. He said he couldn't imagine what kind of horrible person would steal from homeless children. That was the worst part for Stanley. His hero thought he was a no-good, dirty, rotten thief. As Stanley tried to turn over on his cot, he was afraid it was going to collapse under all his weight. He barely fit in it. When he finally managed to roll over on his stomach, the smell was so bad that he had to turn over again and try sleeping on his back. The cot smelled like sour milk. Ooh. Though it was night, the air was still very warm. Armpit was snoring 2 cots away. Back at school, a bully named Derek Dunn used to torment Stanley. The teachers never took Stanley's complaints seriously because Derek was so much smaller than Stanley. Some teachers even seemed to find it amusing that a little kid like Derek could pick on someone as big as Stanley. On the day Stanley was arrested, Derek had taken Stanley's notebook, and after a long game of come and get it, finally dropped it in the toilet in the boys' restroom. By the time Stanley retrieved it, he had missed his bus and had to walk home. It was while he was walking home, carrying his wet notebook with the prospect of having to copy the ruined pages, that the sneakers fell from the sky. "I was walking home and the sneakers fell from the sky," he told the judge. "One hit me on the head. It had hurt too." They hadn't exactly fallen from the sky. He had just walked out from under a freeway overpass when the shoe hit him on the head. Stanley took it as some kind of sign. His father had been trying to figure out a way to recycle old sneakers, and suddenly a pair of sneakers fell on top of him, seemingly out of nowhere, like a gift from God. Naturally, he had no way of knowing they belonged to Clive Livingston. In fact, the shoes were anything but sweet. Whoever had worn them had had a bad case of foot odour. Stanley couldn't help but think there was something special about the shoes, that they would somehow provide the key to his father's invention. It was too much of a coincidence to be a mere accident. Stanley had felt like it was holding Destiny's shoes. He ran. Thinking back now, he wasn't sure why he ran. Maybe he was in a hurry to bring the shoes to his father, or maybe he was trying to run away from his miserable and humiliating day at school. A patrol car pulled alongside him. A policeman asked him why he was running. Then he took the shoes and made a call on his radio. Shortly afterwards, Stanley was arrested. It turned out the sneakers had been stolen from a display at the homeless shelter. That evening, rich people were going to come to the shelter and pay $100 to eat the food that poor people ate every day for free. Clyde Livingston, who had once lived at the shelter when he was younger, was going to speak and sign autographs. His shoes would be auctioned, and he was expected that they would sell for over $5,000. All the money would go to help the homeless. Because of the baseball schedule, Stanley's trial was delayed several months. His parents couldn't afford a lawyer. "You don't need a lawyer," his mother had said, "just tell the truth." Stanley told the truth, but perhaps it would have been better if he had lied a little. He could have said he'd found the shoes in the street. No one believed that they fell from the sky. It wasn't destiny, he realised. It was his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. The judge called Stanley's crime despicable. The shoes were valued at over $5,000. It was money that would provide food and shelter for the homeless. And you stole that from them just so you could have a souvenir. The judge said that there was an opening at Camp Green Lake, and he suggested that the discipline at the camp might improve Stanley's character. It was either that or jail. Stanley's parents asked if they could have some time to find out more about Camp Green Lake, but the judge advised them to make a quick decision. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake.